Chapter 12. How many kinds of soldiery there are, and concerning mercenaries. I have already talked in detail about the characteristics of the different types of principalities I propose to discuss at the beginning. I have also examined the reasons why they succeed or fail. Along the way, I showed the methods many people have used to acquire and hold them. Now, it is time for me to discuss in general terms the methods of attack and defense that apply to each of these states. We have seen how necessary it is for a prince to build solid foundations. Otherwise, he will inevitably face ruin. The most important foundations for all states, whether they are new, old, or mixed, are good laws and good armies. You cannot have good laws if a state is not well armed. It naturally follows that where states are well armed, they will also have good laws. Therefore, I will leave the topic of laws out of this discussion and focus purely on armies. The armed forces a prince uses to defend his state are either his own, mercenaries, auxiliaries, or a mix of these. Mercenaries and auxiliaries are both useless and highly dangerous. If a prince builds his state on mercenary forces, he will never be secure or safe. These troops are divided, ambitious, undisciplined, and completely disloyal. They act brave among friends, but turn cowardly in the face of the enemy. They neither fear God nor keep faith with men. With mercenaries, your destruction is only delayed as long as the attack is delayed. During times of peace, these soldiers rob you. During war, they let the enemy rob you. The truth is, mercenaries have no motivation to stay on the battlefield other than a small paycheck. That tiny wage is simply not enough to make them willing to die for you. They are happy to be your soldiers as long as you are not fighting an actual war. But the moment war breaks out, they will either desert you or run away from the enemy. I do not have to try very hard to prove this point. The current ruin of Italy has been caused by nothing else but relying entirely on mercenary armies for many years. At first, these mercenaries put on a good show and seemed brave when fighting against other Italians. But when foreign invaders arrived, they showed their true colors. This is exactly how King Charles of France was able to conquer Italy so easily, simply marking up the houses where his troops would stay with a piece of chalk. A certain priest once said that our sins were the cause of our downfall, and he told the truth. However, they were not the spiritual sins he imagined, but the military blunders I have just described. And since these were the sins of princes, it is the princes who have ultimately paid the price. Let me explain further why these forces are completely flawed. Mercenary commanders are either highly skilled or they are not. If they are highly skilled, you can never trust them. They will always try to seize power for themselves, either by turning against you, their employer, or by attacking others contrary to your orders. On the other hand, if the commander is incompetent, he will just ruin you the old-fashioned way by losing the war. You might argue that any armed commander will act this way, whether he is a mercenary or not. My answer is that military forces must be commanded directly by either a prince or a republic. A prince should go to the battlefield in person and take on the role of the commander himself. A republic must send its own citizens. If the republic sends a man who turns out to be incompetent, they should replace him immediately. If he proves capable, they must control him strictly with laws so he does not overstep his authority. Experience proves that only princes and republics with their own armies achieve true greatness, while mercenaries do nothing but cause immense damage. Furthermore, it is much harder for a single citizen to take over a republic if it is armed with its own troops, compared to a republic that relies on foreign forces. Rome and Sparta remained armed and free for centuries. The Swiss are heavily armed today, and they are completely free. If you want an example from ancient history, look at the Carthaginians. They were violently oppressed by their own mercenary soldiers right after their first war with the Romans, even though the Carthaginians had their own citizens acting as commanders. Consider the Thebans as well. After the death of Epaminondas, they made Philip of Macedon the commander of their army. After he won the war for them, he immediately stripped them of their liberty. When Duke Filippo died, the Milanese hired Francesco Sforza to fight the Venetians. After he crushed the enemy at the Battle of Caravaggio, Sforza betrayed his employers and allied with the Venetians to conquer Milan. Similarly, his father, Muzio Sforza, was hired by Queen Johanna of Naples. He abruptly abandoned her, leaving her completely unprotected. To save her kingdom, she was forced to throw herself into the arms of the King of Aragon. You might point out that the Venetians and Florentines successfully expanded their empires using mercenary armies in the past, and their commanders defended them instead of making themselves princes. I reply that the Florentines were simply favored by luck. Among the capable commanders they could have feared, some failed to conquer, some faced strong opposition, and others directed their ambitions elsewhere. Giovanni Acuto was one who did not conquer. Because he never won a decisive victory, his loyalty was never truly tested. But everyone must admit that if he had conquered, the Florentines would have been completely at his mercy. Sforza was always opposed by the Bracceschi forces, keeping both factions locked in a stalemate. Eventually, Francesco Sforza focused his ambitions on Lombardy, while Braccio turned his sights against the Church and the Kingdom of Naples. But let us look at what happened just a short time ago. The Florentines appointed Pagolo Vitelli as their commander. He was a highly cautious man who had risen from a commoner to achieve massive renown. If he had managed to capture the city of Pisa, nobody can deny that the Florentines would have been forced to do whatever he wanted. If he had switched sides to join their enemies, Florence would have been defenseless. By keeping him, they would have had to obey him. Now consider the Venetians. If you examine their achievements, you will see they operated safely and gloriously as long as they fought with their own men. This was back when they fought at sea, where their nobles and commoners fought bravely together. But when they started launching military campaigns on land, they abandoned this strategy and adopted the dangerous Italian custom of hiring mercenaries. In the early days of their land expansion, Venice did not have much to fear from their commanders because they owned little territory and had an overwhelming reputation. But when they expanded further under the command of Carmignuola, they realized their massive mistake. They saw he was a brilliant commander after he defeated the Duke of Milan. However, they soon noticed he was growing reluctant to fight. The Venetians realized they could not win any more battles under his command. But they could not simply fire him, because they were terrified of losing the territory they had just gained. To secure themselves, they had no choice but to murder him. Later, Venice hired other mercenary captains like Bartolomeo da Bergamo, Roberto da San Severino, and the Count of Pitigliano. With commanders like these, the Venetians had to worry about catastrophic losses rather than any new gains. This nightmare became reality at the Battle of Vela, where in a single day they lost everything they had spent 800 years painstakingly acquiring. This is the reality of mercenary armies. They bring slow, delayed, and insignificant conquests, but massive, sudden, and devastating losses. Since these examples have brought us back to Italy, a country that has been controlled by mercenaries for many years, I want to explore this issue more deeply. By understanding how the mercenary system began and spread, we will be better prepared to destroy it. You must understand that the Holy Roman Empire has recently lost its authority in Italy. At the same time, the Pope has gained significant political power, and the country has splintered into many smaller states. This happened because many major cities rebelled against their nobles. These nobles, once backed by the emperor, used to oppress the people. The church encouraged these rebellions to increase its own political power, while in other cities, powerful private citizens simply seized control and made themselves princes. As a result, Italy fell entirely into the hands of the church and various republics. Since the church was run by priests and the republics were run by civilians with zero military experience, both groups started hiring foreign mercenaries to fight their wars. The first commander who brought real prestige to these mercenary forces was Alberigo da Conio from Romagna. Men like Braccio and Sforza, who eventually became the undisputed masters of Italy, were trained in his school of warfare. After them came all the other mercenary captains who have commanded Italy's armies up to the present day. The ultimate result of their so-called brilliance is that Italy has been overrun by Charles of France, looted by Louis of France, devastated by Ferdinand of Spain, and utterly humiliated by the Swiss. The guiding strategy of these mercenary captains was to ruin the reputation of foot soldiers in order to boost their own prestige. They did this because they had no land of their own and lived entirely on their paychecks. They could not afford to feed a massive infantry, and a small infantry commanded no respect. So, they relied on cavalry instead. With a relatively small force of horsemen, they could still demand high pay and respect. Things got so absurd that in an army of 20,000 men, you would not even find 2,000 foot soldiers. On top of this, these commanders used every trick in the book to avoid fatigue and danger for themselves and their men. They stopped killing each other in battle. Instead, they just took prisoners and released them without even demanding a ransom. They refused to attack cities at night, and the city garrisons refused to launch night raids against their camps. They stopped building trenches or defensive walls around their camps, and they absolutely refused to fight during the winter. All of this cowardly behavior was perfectly legal under their military rules. They designed this system for one specific purpose: to avoid hard work and danger. Because of them, Italy has been dragged into slavery and total disgrace. Chapter 13. Concerning auxiliaries, mixed soldiery, and one's own. Auxiliary troops are the other useless type of military force. You use them when you call on a powerful ally to bring his army to help and defend you. Pope Julius II did exactly this in recent times. During his campaign against Ferrara, he saw firsthand how pathetic his mercenary troops were. So, he turned to auxiliaries and made a deal with King Ferdinand of Spain to supply him with soldiers and weapons. These auxiliary forces might be capable and effective on their own, but they are always a disaster for the ruler who invites them in. If they lose, you are ruined. If they win, you become their prisoner. And although ancient history is full of examples, I want to stick with this recent case of Pope Julius II. The danger of his decision is obvious. To capture Ferrara, he threw himself completely into the hands of a foreign power. But good fortune intervened and caused a third, unexpected event, saving him from the consequences of his reckless choice. His auxiliary troops were crushed at Ravenna. However, Swiss troops then rose up and drove out the conquerors, surprising everyone, including the Pope. As a result, he avoided becoming a prisoner of his enemies, because they ran away. He also avoided becoming a prisoner of his auxiliaries, because he ultimately won the war using different troops. The Florentines, having no army of their own, sent 10,000 French soldiers to conquer Pisa. By doing this, they put themselves in greater danger than at any other time during their struggles. The Emperor of Constantinople wanted to push back his neighbors, so he brought 10,000 Turkish soldiers into Greece. When the war was over, the Turks refused to leave. This disastrous decision was the beginning of Greece's enslavement by the infidels. Therefore, any ruler who wants to guarantee he will not win should use these troops. They are far more dangerous than mercenaries. With auxiliaries, your ruin is guaranteed from the start. They operate as a unified force, and they obey someone else. Mercenaries, on the other hand, need more time and a better opportunity to turn against you after a victory. They are not a single, united organization. You recruited them, and you pay them. Even if you appoint a commander to lead them, that commander cannot seize enough power quickly enough to destroy you. In short, the greatest danger with mercenaries is their cowardice. The greatest danger with auxiliaries is their competence. Therefore, a wise prince always avoids these foreign armies and relies entirely on his own troops. He would rather lose with his own men than win with someone else's. He knows that a victory won with foreign armies is not a real victory at all. I will never hesitate to highlight Cesare Borgia and his actions. The Duke invaded the Romagna region using auxiliary troops. His entire army consisted of French soldiers, and with them, he captured Imola and Forli. But he quickly realized these forces were not reliable. He switched to mercenaries, thinking they were less dangerous, and hired the Orsini and Vitelli factions. When he actually put them to work, he found them to be disloyal, unreliable, and highly dangerous. So, he wiped them out and finally turned to his own men. You can easily see the difference between these types of armies by looking at the Duke's reputation. Notice how he was viewed when he used the French, when he used the Orsini and Vitelli, and finally, when he relied completely on his own soldiers. Once he had troops whose loyalty he could count on, his power and prestige grew relentlessly. He was never respected more highly than when everyone saw he was the absolute master of his own forces. I intended to stick to recent Italian examples, but I must include Hiero of Syracuse, since I mentioned him earlier. As I noted, the Syracusans made him the commander of their army. He quickly recognized that their mercenary troops, organized much like our modern Italian condottieri, were completely useless. He realized he could not safely keep them, nor could he simply let them go. So, he had them all hacked to pieces. From that day on, he fought his wars using his own troops, never relying on foreigners. I also want to remind you of a story from the Old Testament that fits this perfectly. David offered to fight Goliath, the Philistine champion, on behalf of King Saul. To give David courage, Saul armed him with his own royal weapons. But as soon as David put the armor on, he rejected it. He told the king he could not fight properly with someone else's gear, and he chose to face the enemy with only his sling and his knife. The lesson is simple: the armor of others will either fall off your back, weigh you down, or bind you tight. Charles VII, the father of King Louis XI, used his own ability and good fortune to liberate France from the English. He understood that he desperately needed to be armed with his own forces, so he established a permanent system of cavalry and infantry in his kingdom. Later, his son, King Louis, abolished the national infantry and started hiring Swiss mercenaries instead. This massive mistake, followed by others, is exactly why the French kingdom is in peril today. By elevating the reputation of the Swiss, he ruined the value of his own military. He destroyed his infantry completely. He also subordinated his own cavalry to foreign mercenaries. Because his cavalry became so used to fighting alongside the Swiss, they now believe they cannot win without them. As a result, the French cannot defeat the Swiss, and without the Swiss, the French cannot defeat anyone else. The French army has become a mixed force, part mercenary and part national. This mixed army is much better than using only mercenaries or only auxiliaries, but it is vastly inferior to relying entirely on your own troops. This example proves the point perfectly. The Kingdom of France would be completely unconquerable if they had simply maintained or expanded the military system created by Charles. But the limited wisdom of men often leads them to start something that looks good at first, blinding them to the poison hidden underneath. This is just like the hidden fevers I mentioned earlier. Therefore, a prince who cannot recognize a deadly problem until it is already upon him is not truly wise. Unfortunately, this kind of insight is rare. If you look at the first disaster that struck the Roman Empire, you will find it started the moment they began hiring Goths into their army. From that day forward, the strength of the Roman Empire began to collapse, and all the incredible power they once held was drained away and handed to foreigners. I conclude, therefore, that no state is secure unless it has its own military forces. Without them, you are entirely dependent on fortune, because you lack the strength and ability to defend yourself when adversity strikes. Wise men have always judged that nothing is as fragile and unstable as a reputation for power that is not backed by your own strength. Your own forces are armies made up of your subjects, your citizens, or your dependents. Everything else is either a mercenary or an auxiliary. The method for building your own army is easy to find if you study the rules I have laid out. Look closely at how Philip, the father of Alexander the Great, and many other successful republics and princes armed and organized themselves. I fully commit myself to their example. Chapter 14. That which concerns a prince on the subject of the art of war. A prince should have no other goal, thought, or subject of study than war, its rules, and its discipline. This is the only art expected of a ruler. It is so powerful that it not only maintains the power of those born as princes, but often allows private citizens to rise to that rank. On the other hand, when princes think more about luxury than military strength, they lose their states. The quickest way to lose your power is to neglect the art of war. The surest way to gain a state is to master it. Because Francesco Sforza was a skilled warrior, he rose from a private citizen to become the Duke of Milan. His sons avoided the hardships of war, and so they fell from being dukes back down to private citizens. Being unarmed brings you many evils, but worst of all, it makes you despised. A prince must constantly guard against this disgrace, as I will explain later. There is simply no comparison between an armed man and an unarmed one. It is absurd to expect an armed man to willingly obey an unarmed one, or to think an unarmed prince will be safe among armed servants. The armed man will feel contempt, and the unarmed man will feel suspicion. They cannot possibly work well together. Therefore, a prince who does not understand military strategy will suffer many misfortunes. He will never earn the respect of his soldiers, and he will never be able to trust them. A prince must never let his mind wander from the subject of war. During times of peace, he should train even harder than he does in wartime. He can do this in two ways, through physical action and through mental study. As for physical action, a prince must keep his troops well organized and strictly drilled. He should also constantly go hunting. Hunting hardens the body to physical hardship and teaches him the geography of his territory. He learns how the mountains rise, how the valleys open up, and how the plains are laid out. He studies the nature of local rivers and marshes, paying the closest possible attention to the terrain. This knowledge is useful in two ways. First, he learns the exact layout of his own country, which helps him plan its defense. Second, by studying one landscape, he trains his eye to quickly understand any new territory he might need to explore later. The hills, valleys, plains, rivers, and marshes in Tuscany, for example, share similarities with landscapes in other countries. By studying one region closely, you can easily grasp the terrain of another. A prince who lacks this skill lacks the most essential quality of a military leader. This knowledge teaches him how to ambush the enemy, choose the best campsites, lead his armies on the march, organize battle formations, and besiege towns with maximum advantage. Historians praise Philopoemen, the leader of the Achaeans, for many things, but above all because he never stopped thinking about military strategy during times of peace. When he was traveling through the countryside with his friends, he would frequently stop and ask them questions. He would say, if the enemy were positioned on that hill, and our army were down here, who would have the advantage? How could we safely advance to attack them while keeping our formation intact? If we needed to retreat, how should we fall back? And if the enemy retreated, how should we pursue them? As they walked, he would present every possible scenario an army might face. He would listen to their opinions, state his own views, and back up his arguments with solid reasoning. Because of these constant discussions, when he was finally leading troops in a real war, he never faced an unexpected crisis he could not handle. To exercise his mind, a prince must read history. He should study the actions of great men, observing exactly how they conducted themselves in war. He must analyze the causes of their victories and defeats, so he can copy their successes and avoid their failures. Above all, he should follow the example of great leaders from the past who chose to imitate legendary heroes who came before them. These leaders kept the achievements and deeds of their role models constantly in mind. It is said that Alexander the Great imitated Achilles, Julius Caesar imitated Alexander, and Scipio imitated Cyrus. Anyone who reads Xenophon's Life of Cyrus will clearly see how Scipio's glory came directly from this kind of imitation. They will see how Scipio carefully copied the chastity, kindness, humanity, and generosity that Xenophon attributed to Cyrus. A wise prince must follow these rules. He must never waste his time standing idle during peace. Instead, he must aggressively build up his resources and abilities so they will be ready when hardship strikes. This way, if his fortune suddenly changes, he will be perfectly prepared to withstand her blows. Chapter 15. Concerning things for which men, and especially princes, are praised or blamed. Now we must look at the rules of conduct a prince should follow with his subjects and friends. I know many people have already written about this. Because of that, I expect I will be called arrogant for bringing it up again, especially since my approach will be completely different from everyone else's. However, my goal is to write something genuinely useful for anyone who understands it. Because of this, I think it is better to focus on the real truth of the matter rather than imaginary ideas. Many people have dreamed up republics and principalities that have never actually existed in the real world. The way people actually live is so far removed from the way they ought to live. Therefore, anyone who ignores reality in favor of some ideal will only bring about their own destruction. A man who tries to be good all the time is bound to be ruined among the great number of people who are not good. Therefore, if a prince wants to keep his power, he must learn how not to be good. He must use this knowledge, or not use it, exactly as necessity requires. Let us set aside all these imaginary ideas about a prince and discuss what is real. Whenever men are discussed, and especially princes because they sit higher up, they are noted for specific qualities that bring them either praise or blame. One is considered generous, while another is called miserly. In our Tuscan language, a greedy person wants to take things by robbery, while a miserly person simply refuses to spend his own money. One man is known to be a giver, another a taker. One is cruel, another is compassionate. One breaks his promises, another keeps his word. One is weak and cowardly, another is fierce and brave. One is friendly, another is arrogant. One is lustful, another is pure. One is honest, another is sneaky. One is hard, another is easygoing. One is serious, another is silly. One is religious, another is an unbeliever, and so on. I know everyone will admit that it would be highly praised if a prince had all of these good qualities. However, human nature simply does not allow a person to have them all, or to practice them perfectly. Therefore, a prince must be smart enough to avoid the bad reputation of those vices that would cost him his state. If possible, he should also avoid the lesser vices that would not cost him his power. But if he cannot avoid those lesser vices, he can indulge in them with less worry. Furthermore, he should not lose any sleep over getting a bad reputation for the vices that are absolutely necessary to save his state. If you look at everything carefully, you will find that some things that look like virtue will actually ruin you. On the other hand, some things that look like vice will bring you safety and prosperity if you follow through with them. Chapter 16. Concerning generosity and stinginess. Starting with the first of the traits mentioned earlier, I will say that it is good to have a reputation for being generous. However, if you practice generosity in a way that goes unnoticed, it will actually harm you. If you are honestly generous, as you should be, it might not be recognized. Then you will not escape the reputation of being a miser. Therefore, anyone who wants to keep a reputation for generosity must put on a lavish display. A prince who does this will consume all his wealth in extravagant acts. In the end, to keep up his generous reputation, he will be forced to burden his people, tax them heavily, and do whatever it takes to get more money. This will quickly make his subjects hate him. As he becomes poor, no one will respect him. His generosity will have offended many and rewarded only a few. He will be vulnerable to the very first sign of trouble and endangered by the slightest risk. When he realizes this and tries to cut back, he will immediately be labeled a miser. Therefore, a prince cannot safely practice the virtue of generosity in a way that people recognize, unless he is willing to ruin himself. If he is wise, he should not fear being called cheap. Over time, people will consider him more generous than if he had actually been generous from the start. They will see that his economy keeps his revenue sufficient. They will see that he can defend himself against attacks and undertake campaigns without burdening his people. Thus, he ends up being generous to the countless people he does not tax, and stingy only to the few people he does not give to. In our time, we have only seen great things accomplished by those who were considered cheap. Everyone else has failed. Pope Julius II used his reputation for generosity to reach the papacy, but he did not try to keep it up once he declared war on the King of France. He fought many wars without imposing any special taxes on his subjects, covering his extra expenses through his long history of thriftiness. The current King of Spain would not have undertaken or won so many campaigns if he had a reputation for being generous. Therefore, a prince should not care about being called cheap, as long as it means he does not have to rob his subjects, can defend himself, does not become poor and pathetic, and is not forced to become greedy. Being cheap is simply one of the vices that allows him to rule. Someone might argue that Julius Caesar obtained his empire through generosity, and many others have reached the highest positions because they were generous and had a reputation for it. I answer this: you are either already a prince, or you are on your way to becoming one. If you are already a prince, generosity is dangerous. If you are on your way to becoming one, a reputation for generosity is absolutely necessary. Caesar was one of those who wanted to become the supreme ruler in Rome. But if he had survived after reaching power and failed to cut his expenses, he would have destroyed his own government. Someone else might reply that there have been many princes who led armies and did great things, yet were considered very generous. To this, I reply that a prince either spends his own money, his subjects' money, or the money of others. In the first two cases, he must be thrifty. In the third case, he should take every chance to be generous. For a prince who leads his army and supports it by looting, sacking, and extortion, handling the wealth of others, this generosity is strictly required. Otherwise, his soldiers would not follow him. You can afford to be a generous giver of what belongs to neither you nor your subjects, just like Cyrus, Caesar, and Alexander. Squandering the wealth of others does not hurt your reputation, it only adds to it. It is only squandering your own wealth that hurts you. Nothing consumes itself faster than generosity. Even as you practice it, you lose the ability to keep doing it. You become either poor and despised, or, in an effort to avoid poverty, you become greedy and hated. Above all else, a prince must protect himself from being despised and hated, and generosity leads directly to both. Therefore, it is wiser to accept a reputation for being cheap. It brings a bad name, but no hatred. This is far better than seeking a reputation for generosity, only to be forced into a reputation for greed, which brings both a bad name and intense hatred. Chapter 17. Concerning cruelty and clemency, and whether it is better to be loved than feared. Turning to the other qualities I mentioned earlier, I will say that every prince should want to be seen as merciful rather than cruel. However, he must be careful not to misuse this mercy. Cesare Borgia was considered cruel. Yet, his cruelty brought order to the Romagna, unified it, and restored it to peace and loyalty. If you think about it carefully, you will realize he was actually much more merciful than the people of Florence. To avoid being called cruel, the Florentines allowed the city of Pistoia to be destroyed by warring factions. Therefore, as long as a prince keeps his subjects united and loyal, he should not worry about being called cruel. By making a few harsh examples, he will ultimately be more merciful than those who are too lenient. Too much mercy allows chaos to spread, leading to murders and robberies that harm the entire community. Executions ordered by a prince, on the other hand, only harm specific individuals. It is completely impossible for a new prince to avoid a reputation for cruelty. New states are naturally full of dangers. This is why the poet Virgil, speaking through the character of Dido, excuses the harshness of her rule by pointing out that her kingdom is new. She says that harsh necessity and the newness of her kingdom force her to do such things, and to guard her borders strictly. Still, a prince should not be too quick to believe every rumor or to take immediate action. He must not show fear. Instead, he should act calmly, using good judgment and basic humanity. Too much confidence will make him careless, and too much suspicion will make him unbearable. This raises a famous question. Is it better to be loved than feared, or feared than loved? The answer is that a prince should want to be both. But since it is very hard to combine them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved, if you have to choose just one. You can make this general statement about human beings. They are ungrateful, fickle, fake, cowardly, and greedy. As long as you are successful, they are entirely yours. They will offer you their blood, their property, their lives, and their children, just as I said before, as long as the danger is far away. But the moment danger approaches, they will turn their backs on you. A prince who relies completely on their promises and fails to take other precautions will be ruined. Friendships bought with money, rather than earned through greatness and nobility of character, are just transactions. They are not truly secured, and you cannot rely on them when times get tough. Furthermore, people hesitate much less to betray someone they love than someone they fear. Love is held together only by a sense of obligation. Because humans are naturally selfish, they will break that bond whenever it benefits them. Fear, however, is held together by the dread of punishment, and that dread never fails you. Even so, a prince must inspire fear in a way that avoids hatred, even if he cannot win love. It is very possible to be feared without being hated. A prince can always achieve this as long as he keeps his hands off the property and the women of his citizens and subjects. If he ever absolutely needs to execute someone, he must do it with proper justification and an obvious reason. But above all else, he must never touch anyone else's property. Men will forget the death of their father much faster than they will forget the loss of their inheritance. Besides, there is always an excuse to take someone's property. A ruler who starts living by theft will always find new reasons to seize what belongs to others. By contrast, real reasons to execute someone are harder to find and fade away much faster. However, when a prince is out with his army and in command of a massive number of soldiers, he must stop worrying completely about being called cruel. Without a reputation for cruelty, he will never be able to keep his army united and ready for action. Historians count this among the incredible achievements of the general Hannibal. He led a massive army, made up of many different races of men, to fight in foreign lands. Yet, there was never any conflict among his men, nor did they ever rebel against him, whether he was winning or losing. This was entirely due to his inhuman cruelty. Combined with his endless abilities, this cruelty made him both deeply respected and terrifying in the eyes of his soldiers. Without that cruelty, his other great qualities would never have been enough to achieve this effect. Short-sighted writers admire his military victories on one hand, but condemn the primary cause of those victories on the other. To prove that his other virtues alone would not have been enough, just look at Scipio. Scipio was one of the greatest military commanders not just of his own time, but in all recorded history. Despite this, his own army rebelled against him in Spain. This rebellion happened for one simple reason. He was too lenient. He gave his soldiers far more freedom than is appropriate for strict military discipline. Fabius Maximus publicly scolded him for this in the Senate and literally called him the corrupter of the Roman military. Later, a governor appointed by Scipio utterly destroyed the people of Locri. Because of his easygoing nature, Scipio never avenged the victims, nor did he punish the governor's arrogance. Someone in the Senate even tried to excuse Scipio's behavior by saying that some men are much better at avoiding mistakes themselves than at correcting the mistakes of others. If Scipio had held supreme command, this soft disposition would have eventually destroyed his fame and glory. But because he operated under the strict control of the Roman Senate, this harmful character flaw was not only hidden, it actually ended up contributing to his glory. Returning to the question of being feared or loved, I come to this conclusion. Men choose to love based on their own free will, but they fear based on the will of the prince. A wise prince should always build his foundation on what he alone controls, not on what others control. He must simply focus on making sure he avoids hatred, just as I have explained. Chapter 18. Concerning the way in which princes should keep faith. Everyone agrees that it is praiseworthy for a prince to keep his word and live with integrity rather than deception. Even so, our experience shows that the princes who have accomplished great things did not care much about keeping their promises. They knew how to trick men's minds with cunning. In the end, they defeated those who relied on honesty. You must understand there are two ways to fight, by law or by force. The first method belongs to men, while the second belongs to beasts. But since the first method is often not enough, you must sometimes use the second. Therefore, a prince must know how to act like both a beast and a man. Ancient writers taught this lesson to princes in a hidden way. They wrote about how Achilles and many other ancient princes were given to Chiron the centaur to be raised and trained. Having a teacher who was half beast and half man means one simple thing. A prince must know how to use both of these natures, and one cannot survive without the other. Since a prince is forced to know how to act like a beast, he must choose to be both a fox and a lion. The lion cannot protect itself from traps, and the fox cannot defend itself against wolves. So, you must be a fox to recognize the traps, and a lion to scare off the wolves. Those who only act like a lion do not know what they're doing. Because of this, a wise ruler cannot and should not keep his word when doing so would be used against him, and when the reasons that made him make the promise no longer exist. If all men were completely good, this rule would be wrong. But since men are bad and will not keep their promises to you, you are not bound to keep your promises to them. A prince will never run out of legitimate excuses to break his word. We could give endless modern examples of this, showing how many treaties and promises have become useless and empty because princes broke their faith. The one who has known best how to play the fox has always succeeded the most. But it is necessary to know how to disguise this nature well. You must be a great liar and a hypocrite. Men are so simple, and they are so focused on their present needs, that a deceiver will always find someone willing to be deceived. I cannot stay silent about one recent example. Pope Alexander VI did nothing but deceive people. He never thought of doing anything else, yet he always found victims. No man was ever more convincing. No man ever swore greater oaths to prove a point, and no man ever kept his promises less. Even so, his deceptions always worked exactly as he wanted, because he fully understood this side of human nature. Therefore, a prince does not actually need to have all the good qualities I just listed. However, it is absolutely essential that he appears to have them. In fact, I will dare to say this, having those qualities and always acting on them is dangerous, but appearing to have them is useful. You should seem merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and honest. You should even be these things. But your mind must be so prepared that, if you need to stop being these things, you know exactly how to switch to the opposite behavior. You have to understand that a prince, especially a new one, cannot observe all the rules that make men seem good. To protect his state, he is often forced to act against loyalty, friendship, humanity, and religion. Because of this, he must have a mind ready to shift depending on how the winds and changes of fortune force him. As I said before, he should not turn away from doing good if he can avoid it. But if he is forced to do wrong, he must know exactly how to do it. For this reason, a prince must be very careful. He should never let anything slip from his lips that is not filled with those 5 good qualities. To anyone who sees and hears him, he must appear completely merciful, faithful, humane, honest, and religious. There is nothing more important than appearing to have this final quality of religion. In general, men judge more by their eyes than by their hands. Everyone can see you, but very few can actually touch you. Everyone sees what you appear to be, but few really know what you are. Those few will not dare to oppose the opinion of the majority, especially when the majority has the majesty of the state defending them. When it comes to the actions of all men, and especially of princes where there is no court to appeal to, people judge by the final result. For that reason, let a prince focus on conquering and keeping his state. The methods he uses will always be judged as honorable, and everyone will praise him. The common people are always tricked by appearances and by how things turn out. In this world, there is nothing but the common people. The few only find a place when the majority has nowhere else to turn. There is a certain prince of our own time whom it is better not to name. He preaches nothing but peace and good faith, but he is the greatest enemy of both. If he had actually kept either his peace or his promises, he would have lost his reputation and his kingdom many times over.